The date was April 30th, 1945. The place was a concrete bunker beneath the burning ruins of Berlin, and the man sitting in his small underground room, waiting to die, was Adolf Hitler. In a few hours, he would put a gun to his head and pull the trigger. But first, he had a day to live, a final breakfast to eat, final meetings to attend, final goodbyes to say, final orders to give. What did the most hated man in history do on his last day alive? How did he spend those final hours? What was going through his mind as everything he had built collapsed around him? We know the answers because people survived. Secretaries who were in the bunker, guards who stood watch, officers who attended meetings. They lived through that day, and they told their stories. From their accounts, we can piece together Hitler's final day in extraordinary detail. This is that story, not the political history, not the military analysis, just one man's last day on Earth. From the moment he opened his eyes on the morning of April 30th to the moment he closed them forever. Let us begin. The Führer bunker was a miserable place, 50 feet underground, beneath the garden of the Reich Chancellery, concrete walls so thick that even the heaviest bombs could not break through. But thickness could not keep out the knowledge of what was happening above. Berlin was dying. Soviet forces had surrounded the city. 2 million Red Army soldiers were fighting their way toward the center, street by street, house by house. The sound of artillery never stopped. Every few minutes, another shell would land somewhere nearby, and the bunker would shake. Dust would fall from the ceiling. The lights would flicker. Inside, the air was foul. The ventilation system could not keep up with all the people crammed into the small space. The smell was a mixture of sweat, diesel fumes from the generators, cigarette smoke, and fear. Always fear. About 50 people lived in the bunker during those final days. Hitler and Eva Braun had the main rooms. Joseph Goebbels had moved in with his wife Magda and their 6 children. Various generals, secretaries, guards, and servants filled the remaining spaces. They slept in shifts. They waited for orders. They wondered how it would end. By late April, everyone knew the end was coming. The only question was how. Would the Soviets break through? Would there be a final battle? Would Hitler escape? Would he surrender? Or would he do what many suspected he would do? The days leading up to April 30th had answered most of these questions. On April 22nd, Hitler had suffered a complete breakdown. During a military briefing, when he learned that an attack he had ordered simply had not happened because the troops did not exist, he had exploded. He screamed for hours. He cried. He declared that the war was lost, that everyone had betrayed him, that he would stay in Berlin and die. It was the moment when everyone in the bunker knew the truth. Their leader had given up. After the breakdown, Hitler became calm. He started making preparations. He sent people away, reducing the bunker population to only the most essential staff. He began discussing how his body should be disposed of. He was getting ready for death. On April 28th, 2 days before the end, Hitler received news that shocked him. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, his most faithful follower, had been secretly trying to negotiate surrender with the Western Allies. Of all the betrayals Hitler had experienced, this one seemed to hurt the most. If even Himmler was a traitor, then no one could be trusted. That same night, Hitler made a decision that surprised everyone. He would marry Eva Braun. Eva had been his companion for over a decade, but their relationship was kept secret. She was not his wife, just his girlfriend, hidden away while Hitler presented himself as married only to Germany. But now, with hours to live, he decided to make it official. A city official was found to perform the ceremony. It was brief and bureaucratic. Both Hitler and Eva had to declare they were of pure Aryan blood, a final absurd piece of Nazi paperwork. Eva started to sign her maiden name on the certificate, then crossed it out and wrote Eva Hitler instead. They were married. A small reception followed. Champagne was served. Guests tried to be cheerful, but it was impossible. This was not a wedding. It was a funeral that had not happened yet. After the reception, Hitler stayed up most of the night dictating his final testament. It was a long document, full of blame and hatred. The Jews were responsible for everything. The generals had failed him. The German people had proven unworthy. There was no admission of guilt, no recognition of the suffering he had caused. Just excuses and accusations, right to the very end. He also wrote his personal will, leaving his possessions to relatives in the Nazi Party. He appointed Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor. He expelled Göring and Himmler from the party for their betrayals, and he urged the German people to continue fighting against the Jews, the obsession that had driven his entire career. By the time he finished, it was almost morning on April 30th. Hitler went to bed as dawn broke over the burning city. This brings us to Hitler's final day. He slept late, as always. Hitler had never been a morning person. Throughout his life, he had stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes later, and slept until nearly noon. Even in the bunker, even with Soviet troops closing in, he kept the schedule. It was one of the few normal things left in his life. He woke around 10:30 or 11. When he emerged from his bedroom, the staff noticed how terrible he looked. His face was gray and puffy from lack of sunlight. His eyes were red and tired. His hands shook constantly, a tremor that had grown worse over the past year. He walked slowly, hunched over, shuffling his feet. He looked 20 years older than his actual age of 56. Hitler's health had been deteriorating for years. His personal doctor gave him dozens of medications every day, pills and injections, whose purposes were not always clear. He suffered from stomach problems that caused constant pain. The shaking in his hands, which he tried to hide by holding them behind his back or pressing them against his body, suggested some kind of neurological problem. He was not a healthy man, but on this final morning, health no longer mattered. He was not trying to get better. He was waiting to die. Hitler ate a light breakfast. He had been a vegetarian for many years, avoiding meat because he believed it clouded the mind. His meals consisted of vegetables, pasta, pastries, and sometimes eggs. On this morning, the bunker kitchen prepared whatever was available. Food supplies were running low. The elaborate dinners of earlier years were a distant memory. After breakfast came the morning military briefing. This daily ritual had become almost meaningless. Officers would describe the military situation, which was catastrophic. Hitler would respond by ordering counterattacks that could not happen, moving divisions that no longer existed on maps that no longer reflected reality. Everyone knew it was theater, but no one dared break the illusion. The news on April 30th was the worst yet. Soviet forces had captured the Reichstag, the German parliament building, just a few hundred meters from the bunker. Fighting was taking place almost directly overhead. German resistance was crumbling everywhere. The Soviets could reach the chancellery within hours. There was also news from outside Berlin that affected Hitler deeply. He had been hoping that relief forces would break through and save the city. General Wenck's army was supposed to be fighting its way toward Berlin. General Steiner was supposed to be attacking from the north. These hopes were fantasies. Wenck's army had been stopped. Steiner's attack had never happened. No one was coming to save them. Hitler received this information calmly. He had already accepted death. The military situation no longer mattered to him personally. He was just going through the motions. Around noon, Hitler had lunch with his secretaries. This was his last meal. According to the women who were there, it was spaghetti with a light tomato sauce, one of his regular dishes. He ate very little. He was not hungry. The conversation during lunch was strange. Hitler talked about trivial things: dogs, diet, the weather. He made small talk as if this were any ordinary day, as if Soviet tanks were not rumbling through the streets above them. His secretaries found this calmness disturbing. They were terrified. He seemed almost peaceful. After lunch, the goodbyes began. Word had spread through the bunker that Hitler planned to kill himself that afternoon. His staff came to see him, one by one or in small groups, to pay their final respects. Hitler shook hands with each of them. He thanked them for their service. He was polite and formal, showing none of the rage that had marked his behavior in recent weeks. Some of these goodbyes were emotional. Hitler's secretaries had worked for him for years. They had typed his letters, taken his dictation, listened to his late-night monologues about history and philosophy. Now they were saying goodbye forever. Some of them cried. Hitler did not. One of the most poignant farewells was with the Goebbels children. There were 6 of them, ranging in age from 4 to 12. Their names all started with the letter H, in honor of Hitler. Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun. They had been living in the bunker with their parents for the past week. Hitler was genuinely fond of these children. They were a bright spot in the darkness of the bunker. They played games in the corridors. They sang songs for him. They drew pictures. They brought a strange innocence to a place filled with despair. On this final afternoon, Hitler said goodbye to each child. He gave them chocolate. He patted their heads. He told them to be good. The children did not fully understand what was happening. They knew things were bad, but they did not know that they were also going to die. After Hitler's suicide, Magda Goebbels would murder all 6 children. She had decided that they should not live in a world without National Socialism. On the evening of May 1st, she would give each child a sleeping potion, and then, when they were unconscious, she would crush cyanide capsules in their mouths. All 6 would die in their beds, but that horror was still a day away. On this afternoon, they were just children saying goodbye to Uncle Adolf. Sometime in the early afternoon, Hitler dealt with one final matter. He was worried about the cyanide capsules he planned to use. The pills had been provided by the SS, and given all the betrayals he had experienced, Hitler was not sure he could trust them. What if they were fake? What if they did not work? He would look foolish, dying slowly from a failed suicide while the Soviets broke down the door. He decided to test the capsules on his dog. Blondie was a German shepherd that Hitler had owned for several years. He loved this dog in a way he seemed incapable of loving human beings. He played with her, trained her, kept her by his side constantly. In the loneliness of the bunker, Blondie was his closest companion. Now she would be his test subject. Hitler ordered his doctor to give Blondie a cyanide capsule. The doctor crushed the capsule and forced it into the dog's mouth. The poison worked immediately. Blondie collapsed, convulsed briefly, and died within seconds. Hitler watched his dog die. According to witnesses, he was deeply upset. More upset than he had been about any military defeat or personal betrayal. The death of this one dog seemed to affect him more than the deaths of millions of people. He retreated to his private quarters, visibly shaken. Whatever emotions he had left, he had just spent them on Blondie. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Hitler gathered his closest staff for a final meeting. He announced that he and Eva would be killing themselves shortly. He gave specific instructions about their bodies. They were to be carried up to the garden and burned with gasoline. Nothing should remain for the Soviets to find. Hitler was terrified of what had happened to Mussolini. The Italian dictator had been captured by partisans just 2 days earlier. Mussolini and his mistress had been shot, and then their bodies had been hung upside down at a gas station. Crowds had gathered to abuse the corpses, spitting on them, kicking them, urinating on them. Photographs had been published around the world. Hitler could not bear the thought of this happening to him. He would not be captured. He would not be displayed. He would not be humiliated. His body would be destroyed completely. His pilot offered one last time to fly him out of Berlin. A small plane might still be able to escape. Hitler could go anywhere. Start a new life. Avoid the end that was coming. Hitler refused. He had made his decision. He would die in Berlin. Around 3:15, Hitler said his final goodbyes. He walked down the corridor, shaking hands one last time with his secretaries, his valet, his cook, his guards. Some were crying openly. Hitler remained calm and formal. Then he took Eva's hand and led her into their private sitting room. The room was small and simple. A couch covered in blue and white fabric, a few chairs, a coffee table, a portrait of Frederick the Great on the wall. Not much else. A small, plain room for a very large death. The door closed behind them. Outside, the staff waited in the corridor. No one spoke. The only sounds were the distant rumble of artillery and the hum of the ventilation system. Inside the room, Hitler and Eva sat down on the couch. They had a few minutes alone together, these two people whose relationship had always been strange and hidden. Eva had devoted her entire adult life to this man. She had accepted years of secrecy, years of being ignored, years of being kept in the shadows, and now she would die for him. She could have left. Hitler had urged her to escape Berlin. She had refused. She wanted to be with him at the end. This was her choice. Eva bit down on her cyanide capsule. The poison worked instantly, just as it had worked on Blondie. She collapsed against the couch, dead within seconds. Her skin began to turn slightly blue from the cyanide, but otherwise she looked peaceful. Hitler picked up his pistol. It was a Walter, a small handgun, loaded with a single bullet. He put the barrel against his right temple. Some accounts say he also placed a cyanide capsule in his mouth, wanting to be absolutely certain of death. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot was loud in the small concrete room. It echoed down the corridor, reaching the ears of everyone waiting outside. They knew immediately what it meant. Adolf Hitler was dead. The time was approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. The staff waited several minutes before entering the room. They wanted to be sure it was over. They wanted the smoke to clear. Hitler's valet opened the door first. The scene inside was grim but orderly. Hitler had fallen forward, slumping over the arm of the couch. Blood was spreading across the carpet beneath his shattered head. The pistol had fallen to the floor. Eva sat beside him, unmarked except for the bluish tint of cyanide on her lips. The room smelled of gunpowder and blood and bitter almonds. The valet and several SS officers wrapped the bodies in blankets. They carried them through the emergency exit, up the stairs into the Chancellery garden. The garden was a wasteland. Once it had been beautiful, with trees and flowers and winding paths. Now it was a moonscape of bomb craters and rubble. Smoke drifted across the sky. The thunder of Soviet artillery was constant. Shells were landing nearby every few minutes. A shallow pit had been dug earlier in the day. The bodies were placed inside, still wrapped in their blankets. Gasoline was poured over them, about 50 gallons that had been gathered with difficulty in the fuel-starved final days. Someone threw a burning rag into the pit. The gasoline ignited with a great rush of flame. The blankets caught fire. The clothes caught fire. The bodies caught fire. The small group of mourners raised their arms in the Nazi salute as their leader burned. Then Soviet shells began landing closer, and they ran for the safety of the bunker. The cremation continued for several hours, but it was never complete. The mourners could not stay outside long enough to ensure total destruction. When they finally gave up, what remained of Adolf Hitler was a charred mass of bone and tissue, burned beyond recognition, but not entirely gone. Soviet soldiers found the remains a few days later. They identified the body through dental records, matching Hitler's distinctive bridgework. The remains were photographed, autopsied, and then hidden away for decades. In 1970, Soviet authorities finally destroyed what was left, cremating the bones and scattering the ashes in a river. They wanted to make sure no grave could ever become a place of pilgrimage. The bunker itself was captured by Soviet troops on May 2nd. Some of Hitler's staff escaped, others were captured, others died. Goebbels and his wife killed themselves and their children on the evening of May 1st, following Hitler into death. The war continued for one more week. Admiral Donitz, Hitler's designated successor, tried to negotiate with the Allies. On May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. World War II in Europe was over. What are we to make of Hitler's final day? In some ways, it was remarkably ordinary. He woke up. He ate meals. He attended meetings. He said goodbye to people he knew. These are things any person might do on any day. But this was not any person. This was Adolf Hitler, the man who started a war that killed over 60 million people, the man who ordered the murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others, the man who brought more destruction to the world than almost any other individual in history. And on his final day, he showed no remorse, none at all. His final testament blamed everyone else. The Jews were responsible. The generals had failed him. The German people were unworthy. He took no responsibility for anything. He apologized for nothing. He regretted nothing. He cried for his dog. He did not cry for the millions of human beings who died because of his decisions. He spent his final hours eating spaghetti and making small talk about trivial matters while the world burned around him. He said goodbye to children who would be murdered the next day. He shook hands with people whose lives he had ruined. And then he took the easy way out. He shot himself rather than face justice. He burned his body rather than face humiliation. He escaped the punishment that he deserved. This was not courage. This was cowardice. The man who sent millions to die in battle, in camps, in gas chambers, could not face death himself with any dignity. He hid underground until the last possible moment, then killed himself to avoid consequences. Today, the site of the bunker is an unmarked parking lot in Berlin. There is no memorial. There is no museum. Germany has deliberately chosen to leave the site anonymous, fearing it could become a gathering place for those who still admire Hitler. This is probably the right choice. Hitler does not deserve monuments. He deserves only to be remembered as a warning about hatred, a warning about extremism, a warning about what happens when evil is given power. April 30th, 1945. A man woke up, ate breakfast, said goodbye to some friends, poisoned his dog, and shot himself. That was Adolf Hitler's last day. He died without remorse. He died without dignity. He died as he had lived, blaming everyone but himself. The bunker is gone now. The Reich is gone. The war is over. But the memory remains, and it must remain so that we never forget what one man's hatred can do to the world.